Welcome to the Student Ministry Podcast. My name is Steve Cullen, and I'm your host today for episode 32 of this podcast. Today, we're going to be talking to Mike Haynes. Mike has been in ministry, student ministry, for over 8 years, and he currently serves as one of the two student ministries directors at Christian Fellowship Church in Ashburn, Virginia, and he is also the founder of G-Shades, a student curriculum for your youth group. And we're going to talk a lot about that today, talk about his story and how God has brought him to this point where he is today, both in his local church ministry, but also in his new endeavor of developing this curriculum. He's also written for Orange's XP3 curriculum, stuff you can use as curriculum, Download Youth Ministry, and I'm so excited for you to hear his story today and find out a little more about what God has been teaching Mike over the last several years in his ministry. But before we jump into that, we do want to thank our sponsor for today's podcast. WorkCamp NE is an amazing ministry that it's so great for students to just get out and serve others, right? I mean, many of you are probably looking for service opportunities or mission trip opportunities for your students, and I want to highly encourage you to check out WorkCamp NE. For many, many years, we have partnered with them at my last ministry. It created some awesome opportunities for our students to get out and serve people around them, and also build relationships, not only with the people they're serving, but with other youth groups that we come together and serve with throughout the entire week. And it's all together in this great package of both serving and worship and teaching and growing and devotion. And it's really the best way to describe it in my mind is this mashup between a great conference or camp and a great mission trip experience all in the same week. So make sure you check out workcampne.com. And here's the deal. If one of their pre-planned weeks don't work for you, you can also talk to them about doing a private week for you, or even like a private weekend or a day thing. Just make sure you check out their website and shoot them an email, give them a call. If you have any questions, you'll be glad you did. All right. So before we jump into today's conversation with Mike Haynes, I do want to remind you, especially if you're new, if you have not subscribed, make sure you do so. If you enjoy what you hear, make sure you leave a positive comment on your favorite podcast app of choice, and that'd be great, so we can kind of get the word out there and share it with other people that you know. That'd be awesome. And with all that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into this conversation with Mike Haynes. Well, hey, Mike, I'm so glad to have you on the podcast today. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going well, man. Doing well. Had a great day, and excited to finish it off with this. We are recording pretty late for me at this point. I mean, I tell you, I'm an old man, so this is almost bedtime for me. So hopefully I make it through this without falling asleep. We'll see.
That's true. You're over on the East Coast, and I remember the Eastern time zone just like it was last year. Well, because it actually was
about last year. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. I'm still adjusting to the Mountain time zone myself. So
Still jet lagged, man. It takes a while to get over that.
Yeah. So cool, Mike. It's been cool to kind of get to know you a little bit. We've connected through Twitter a little bit, looked at your curriculum and stuff that you've just now launched. But before we jump into any of those questions, I just want to start with let's let the podcast audience know a little bit like who you are, and the big question is like, how did God bring you to the point where you are today in your ministry?
Man, that's such a cool question. I love being able to share a little bit of a story and hearing other people's stories. So, the classic way to start off a testimony for any Christian is I grew up in a Christian family, and that's very true of me. My dad's a pastor, my grandfather's a pastor, and so I got ministry in my blood. But as a young kid, I didn't want to be a pastor. I wanted to play for the Lakers. Wanted to play point guard alongside Kobe, and the doctors told me that I would be 6 feet tall. And I know you have not seen me in person, Steve, but I am 5'8", and so I didn't quite make it. And so at some point in my life, my passion shifted from basketball to youth group. I'd gotten involved in a great youth group, and it just, when I was 13, 14, and it just stole my heart. And so basketball wasn't cutting it for me anymore, and I was sick of missing it. And so I'm missing youth group so that I could be at basketball practice. And so I did what every youth pastor wishes that their influencers would do. And I literally quit basketball so that I could get more plugged into my student ministry. And I think it was a really, really good decision for me because, again, I'm 5'8", which means I probably would not make a very good NBA player, but so far doing student ministry has worked out pretty well. And so I'm glad that I made that decision.
Nice.
I went to college, went to Liberty University, studied youth ministry there, and graduated bachelor's in that, and then got plugged into a church and kind of a fairly new church plant in Charlottesville, and was there for about 2.5 or 3 years. I was 20 years old when I graduated college, and graduated, immediately got married, and started first full-time gig in student ministry. Really, when I say full-time, I mean I worked full-time, but I was an intern. I'm sure there are a lot of youth pastors in the world who can definitely resonate with that, where you get paid like an intern, but you work like a youth pastor.
Of course.
And so I was in that type of environment for the first couple of years, which is totally fair because I was 20. And so I did my due diligence there and spent a couple of years at that church, learning, growing, making lots and lots of mistakes, and then transitioned to back to my hometown in Ashburn, Virginia, working at a church back here in my hometown. And my wife and I are from here, and we have kids now, and the kids' grandparents are here, and all that kind of stuff. And so it actually is quite nice being back home. But yeah, so that's where I'm at my current job now, and love what I do. I started in middle school ministry at the church that I'm at, and after about 1.5 years, they asked me to come on and oversee middle and high school ministry alongside one other person. And so she and I run the middle and high school ministry together, which has been a really cool experiment in terms of co-leading, and it's been really, really neat, and I love it. Over the course of the last couple of years, I've gotten to see my interests take an interesting spin that I didn't quite expect. I started doing some writing, and so found out that found out about DYM and started to write for DYM in terms of being an author and all that kind of stuff, and really enjoyed doing that and putting stuff out on the store and learning how to create resources for youth workers, and then I've written a little bit for XP3 as well, middle and high school, and am on the docket to write for Grow Volume 3 as well when that releases next year. And so have been getting chances to do a little bit of writing, and have really, really enjoyed that, and found something that I think is something that I'm good at that I didn't know I was good at. And so
Nice.
I really appreciate getting to do that.
That's really cool. Probably, something that came out of left field. Thinking your path was going to go down athletics, and all of a sudden now you're in the writing field, and it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Yeah,
I don't when I was in elementary school, I mean, literature, not my favorite class, and so I like math, and so to be now, kind of the part of my job that I'm starting to enjoy a lot is writing. I just did not see that coming.
Yeah.
So it's been weird changing as I grow into an older adult. So
I'm sure. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I actually I resonate with your story a little bit, because I also had dreams of the NBA. But
did you now?
I have an inch on you, but not much.
Okay,
so I'm
right.
5'9", but I did push through though. And as you can tell, I'm definitely still playing point guard for the NBA. No.
In what team is this again? I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
That's not important details. Yeah,
no,
details.
I don't want to toot my own horn. This is your time.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I probably should have quit. It was fun, but yeah, it definitely didn't lead to anything more than just a fun sport to play.
Just a good time.
Sure. Yeah, it didn't help that all the other guys on my team were way over 6 foot, and I was by far I think there was 2 guys on our team that were under, and I was the second shortest guy on the team. So
yeah, that's a great time. Okay, this has nothing to do with student ministry, but it's just a funny anecdote. So when I first got to high school, I was 5'4", 5'3", whatever. I was a shrimp, but there was already a kid who the freshman team coach knew that he played point guard, so he got to play point guard even though he was like 3 or 4 inches taller than me.
Yeah.
And so he got to play point guard, which means that my starting spot, I played small forward, which I felt was just insulting. He's just really rubbing it in at that point that I was shorter than everyone else. And so But yes, that's just a weird fun fact that nobody asked for. So that's good.
That's great. So are you at your, if I can ask that question properly, your home church? I know you said you were in your hometown. Is that the church you grew up in?
My home church, what I would consider my home church here, is a church plant that launched off of the church that I'm at now.
Okay.
And so I'm very, very familiar with the church that I'm at now. I went to the youth group here as a high school student, primarily because the church's facility is very large and they have a gym. And so it's kind of the only youth group in town you could go and play basketball at. And so I came to the youth group primarily for that. So yeah, I'm very familiar. I see people that I'm like, oh, I remember you from when I was a teenager. And so that's a little weird sometimes, but it's also, it's been pretty cool to feel like I'm home, you know?
Yeah, that's a really cool thing, because I've talked to a lot of other youth workers, and it's always that hard thing to like go back to your home church, your hometown sometimes. But it seems like you almost have the best of both worlds. You're back there, but you're not at the exact same place, so you don't maybe have to deal with some of those nuances of, oh, now he's not a student anymore, he's actually leading things, and how does that work and everything.
Right. Yeah, it's nice. I come in with a little bit of anonymity, but some familiarity with people who have been around for a decade or so.
Yeah.
They might remember me.
That's really cool. And you probably can relate to the students because you're like, hey, this is where I went to school, and this is where what I did when I was hanging out here growing up.
It does. It makes it really easy to just name drop, the hangout spots around town or things that I know that kids from Ashburn definitely do every year, and just to have that easy connecting point with them. I think I found that to be very, very valuable. So it's been cool.
That's awesome. So yeah, you said you kind of transitioned in your ministry. So I just like to talk a little bit about what does your ministry look like on a regular basis there at your church, and how's things operate. So as far as programs and maybe even your week to week sort of schedule, and how that leading kind of co-leading how that works.
Yeah, that's great. I'll start off with the co-leading. It's just super fresh, and so yeah, essentially what happened is the guy who was in high school transitioned to oversee young adults and communication in our church, and they wanted me to transition from middle school ministry to high school ministry. But I honestly, I've had too many people like Kurt Johnson, Ashley Bohans, and Tom Shefchunas pouring into me, and so podcasts, books, all that kind of stuff. And so I just, come to believe that middle school ministry is too important to abandon. And so I wanted to take on both because I was excited to do high school ministry and to oversee the development there. But man, just really too much of a control freak to give up the reins on middle school and then have to depend on somebody else to set me up to win. That's like, oh man, I got too many control issues that Jesus hasn't worked through yet to do that. And so I asked them if I could take over both, and they said, yeah, you can take over both, but we're definitely going to give you a co-pilot. So yeah, she and I have been working together now for a little over a year, and it's been really, really neat to see how that's worked. We were not, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can resonate with this, we were not given very clear job descriptions. So we were just kind of thrown in there together and like, all right, you two are running it now. Go for it. And so it's, we've had to figure it out over the course of the past year and a half. What is she gifted at? What am I gifted at? How do we split? We're not splitting middle and high school. We're kind of both doing both, but there are some responsibilities that are naturally. So we've had to figure that out together. And it's definitely been a challenge. I have almost zero tips on how to do that well. It's just a beautiful mess that we're kind of figuring out together and trying to figure out what our roles are and what our strengths are and weaknesses and all that kind of stuff. So it's been good. Our ministry itself, runs Sunday mornings, and this is something that I've inherited. This structure is Sunday mornings, middle and high school ministry meet at the same time in separate rooms, which has meant that me and my co-pilot have to kind of switch back and forth to make sure that we're both seeing both sets of kids. We are try to be as dependent on our small group leaders as we can be. We really try to lean heavily into lead small, although we just are at a church environment where almost all of our small group leaders are parents in their 40s and 50s.
Okay.
And so they don't always have the time capacity that we dream for them to have in terms of pouring into their kids, but think that we're trying to do the best we can to lead them and invest in them so that they'll give their all. They'll give as much effort as they can possibly give into making disciples of their few. And then we've got a Wednesday night thing for high school students that really is less of a Bible study and almost not even a youth group, but it's actually more of like we do hang out, we do play games, but that has become more of a time of allowing students to share their story in a context with one another, which has been pretty cool. So it almost operates as its own small group thing where students share their story. Here's what God's doing in my life, so that environment's been pretty cool. And we've seen it yield some pretty good dividends in our little tribe. Church is 1,500, just for context. Church is about 1,500. Student ministry is 60, 75 middle school and 50 high school. And so we're trying to do the best we can to figure out where we're going and stuff like that. We're going through a transition in our church right now where we're getting ready to change from in our old facility where we're at now to a new facility. We're building a new one. And so we're going through that transition and dealing with, what's the new facility going to look like? What's our programming going to look like in the new facility? How do we want the environment to feel? And what are some changes that we can naturally make quicker than maybe we could if we weren't changing facilities? We can now make those changes quicker because everything's changing. And so we're figuring all of that out right now. So there's a lot of question marks and just things that we're just trying to navigate. So it's been a cool season for us.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm sure there's it's always exciting to go through transitions like that. But there's also the hassle of trying to figure things out and everything. It's amazing how much actually our stories kind of are similar enough to each other. I'm also kind of have a co-pilot, if you will, with me here, and it's my first time, and we've been at it for about a year as well, and we're still learning it all. We have a little more direction of how I think we're supposed to do this, but we're still trying to figure it out as well, and there's a lot that we're still learning too. But it's fun to kind of bounce ideas off of you, and same thing as, and if you find out something, definitely shoot me a text or something and let me know that this works out really well, because
we got to talk offline about this. This is fascinating
for sure. But you mentioned earlier that writing is really big for you, and I know a big aspect of your ministry now is shifting into this curriculum writing and things. I'd love to know how that all transpired, and how does this connect with your ministry at the church, and then after that we can kind of dive into what the curriculum is all about. But I'd love to see how that connects with how you do this, week in and week out ministry, and then also writing and trying to resource other youth ministries out there.
Well, man, like so many people's passion projects that they've decided to pursue, this one just came out of my time with the Lord. And so a couple of years ago, I went through a season where I wasn't questioning my faith. I was just trying to figure out some answers to some core questions. So I was trying to figure out what are the implications of the fact that Jesus died for me? I recognize that, because I guess to me, I was thinking, okay, I know that Jesus died for my sins, and I understood the gospel, fairly well at that point, graduated Bible college, all that kind of stuff. But I was thinking what is it? Why does it change me? Knowing that Jesus has died for my sins, why does that change me? And why is it that I look around? Why does it change me? And then more importantly, why doesn't it change me? Knowing that Jesus died for my sins. And so out of that came this this paradigm shift for me, where I started to, in my own personal walk, in my own personal sanctification, I started to ask myself the question, okay, so what? So what that Jesus died for me? So the gospel. So what? And so for my ministry, how that translated is that we started to teach a little bit differently from time to time. This wasn't something that, and is still not something that we do all the time, but we started to teach a little differently, to where we would teach series that were not focused on teaching students what to do, but instead teaching them how to see. Because I started recognizing that the reason that my behavior was not lining up with what I believe or what I say I believe is because even though I might believe something, or even though I might ascribe to a certain set of principles, my eyes are still seeing the world around me through an unhealthy filter. And so I wanted to kind of make a shift in our ministry so that our students started to catch on to some of that terminology and start to process their faith and their walk with the Lord that way. And so we did a couple of series over the course of a couple of years that focused very hard on a couple of passages of scripture where it was very clear that Jesus saw things differently than other people. And you could clearly see how that played out. And I saw some really cool things in the lives of our students when they started seeing people differently. And so I'll give an example of that. Just a huge win for me in processing all of this was we taught on Matthew 9 through 13, where Jesus is talking to Matthew, or Jesus is hanging out with Matthew and his tax collector friends, and they're all a bunch of sinners, and they're hanging out and having a good time and eating dinner and all that. And the Pharisees come up, and the story, the Pharisees are, why is Jesus eating with such scum? And I think a lot of our students see kids around them, and they look at them and they see them as scum, and they have good reasons for seeing the kids at their school as scum, because maybe the kids at their school do scummy things. And so, like the Pharisees, we label these people as scum because we see them as scum, and so we treat them as scum. And Jesus reoriented the whole thing. He said, no, Pharisees, you are actually seeing them through an unhealthy filter. They're not scum, they're sick, and they're sick with the same sickness that you're sick with, which is sin. And so that's one of those things where you start to see people through the filter of the gospel. And suddenly the question that we started asking students in our ministry, the question we started answering for students in our ministry wasn't, how can I treat the scummy people in my life with love and kindness? It wasn't, here's 3 tips from the Bible on how to be kind to people who are scummy or scummy people, but instead reorienting them to see that, actually the person that you're calling scummy, they're not scum at all, they're sick. And when your dog is sick at your house, and your dog is whining a lot because they're sick, or maybe they're a little bit irritable, so maybe they're lashing out a little bit more than normal because they're not feeling well, you treat that dog very differently naturally than you would at just a bad dog. Because they're not just a bad dog, they're a sick dog. And so you treat them differently. I don't even have to tell you how to treat your dog when they're sick, because you see them as sick. So you automatically treat them differently. And so, and I think, again, for me and for our ministry, like, we just started to see some really cool dividends for our students when we started to reorient them around that kind of thinking and that kind of seeing life through the filter of the gospel. So we had one 6th grade girl who decided to try this out. And so she went back to her school after we gave that talk, and there's this girl at her school who was kind of known as this is middle school, but this girl at school was kind of known as the girl at school who is, kind of promiscuous and gets around, and no one really likes her, but obviously the boys kind of like her. But, it's one of those things where she just doesn't have a good reputation. And this student had tears in her eyes as she came back to me the next week and just shared, like, I see her so much. I treat her so much differently now, because I recognize that she's not scum. She's sick. Someone has hurt her. She is hurt, and she is suffering from the sin that has gripped her. And only Jesus can say it, right? And so I'm like, man, I don't even have to tell you what to do to be kind to her anymore, because your entire paradigm for viewing her has been shifted the gospel. And so that's kind of how it's played out in our ministry, of just starting to see things a little bit differently.
That's awesome. That's so good, because I've seen similar things, but that's such a great way to put it, because it really does come down to a big prayer of mine recently. Even several years in ministry and walking with Christ for a good portion of my life. My prayer is, help me see the world the way you see it, God.
That's good.
Help me see the people that I pass the way you see them, and then when we can orient our lives differently. Our preacher not too long ago was talking about the importance of prayer alongside this as well, to start praying for people differently, because then we'll actually start seeing them differently as well. And man, like that's got to change like our entire outlook. And that's so cool that you have personal examples of, how it's changed your students. And this is not just an idea, that you've actually seen some fruit of this labor as well. And I saw God do some awesome stuff in your own students. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So what kind of, a lot of people, like there's a lot of different curriculums out there and everything. So other than the theme itself, that kind of this idea of seeing, so we actually didn't mention the name of it yet. It's called G Shades. Kind of the idea, as I understand it, is this is gospel shades, the way we can see the world through the gospel, the lens of the gospel. And so other than that theme, is there anything else that kind of sets this apart from maybe some other curriculum that's out there?
I think I think that it is very, very like here. I'll just be super blunt about it. Like the idea of seeing life through the filter of the gospel and seeing ourselves through the filter, ourselves, God, people, purpose through the filter of the gospel,
mm-hmm.
like that is the curriculum shift.
Gotcha.
It's like, yes, it is it just a theme? Like there's definitely a theme aspect to it, but I think it's an entire paradigm shift of the way that we teach students to process their faith. And I think that you can take the gospel and look at the multifaceted gem that is the gospel. You can just stare at it, and you can stare at it all day, and you'll just find it'll reflect back to you all kinds of things about your life. And so for me, I think it's an entire paradigm shift. But yeah, that essentially is the curriculum. Is like, cool. Let's take issues that our students are wrestling with. This isn't in the first set of a series that we've released this year, but I'm planning on tackling it next year. Is like, let's talk about the LGBT thing, but not just, but like talk about it through the filter of the gospel. Like, what if our students saw this issue through the filter of the gospel? Like, you can take anything, the social media thing, you can take the academic pressure that students face today, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. You can take the mental health issues. You can take everything that kids are wrestling with today that we did not necessarily, it wasn't as highlighted when we were growing up, mm-hmm. as the kids are trying to navigate it right now as a follower of Jesus. And we can look at it through the filter of the gospel. And I think it's going to be a more holistic and a better approach for their spiritual development than if we were to do biblical principles, but not necessarily intentionally bring it back to the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus, the Emmanueling of Jesus. And so that really is the curriculum. There are some cool things about it. There's some, it has all it has some of the bells and whistles of the bumper video, mm-hmm. and the parent cue and the leader guide and all that, the devotionals and that kind of stuff, some standard stuff. But really, this is just for folks who say, you know what, I do want to start teaching students, or I want to continue teaching students to see life through the filter of the gospel. There is a verse a set of verses that I ran into in the book of Matthew that lit my heart on fire when I read them. It was like I had never seen them before when I read them a couple months ago, as I was developing this idea. And this is in Matthew 6:22. Jesus says, he's in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. Right. So when your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And so part of me wonders, like, and then he goes on actually to say in the rest of verse 23, and if the light that you think you have is actually darkness, man, how deep that darkness is. And I look at that verse and I'm like, oh man, like we've got all these kids who are leaving the faith after high school, and we're trying to fix that as the church. What can we do about that? How do we disciple them better? How do we teach from a different angle? What do we need to do to address that? And I'm thinking to myself, like, what if the reason so many kids are leaving the faith after high school, what if a huge chunk of or a part of the reason for that is because we're pouring a ton of light into their body? Here's what you do. Here's what you should do. Do this, do this, do this. But they're walking away from high school and their eyes are still unhealthy. Because we haven't addressed the way that they see. And so they know how to do all of the right Christian-y things.
Right.
But they leave high school and they get confronted by a different worldview and they don't have a filter.
Yeah.
through which to see the world. It's all about knowledge and what you know and doing this and doing that. But if you have a gospel filter, then you can approach anything after high school. And if you see it through the filter of the gospel, that'll help you navigate it.
Right.
Whether it's sleeping with your boyfriend and girlfriend in college or going to a party or your atheist professor who's trying to convince you there's no God. Whatever it is, if you have a filter, then that'll help you. So yes, I think that G Shades is thematic in nature. I just think that it goes way beyond just a simple theme or a simple series. I think it's an entire paradigm shift.
Gotcha. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I've seen that, the sample that you sent me and looked through it and everything. And I was kind of wrestling with this, like, how does this work? But that explanation helps so much, because I think, as you were kind of getting at, like, if we're just telling them how to live, if we're just doing that work for them and creating their checklist, if you will, like, then how are we actually helping them to be lifelong disciples? How is that actually going to change their life? Like, we need to be able to help them to actually approach it and make their faith their own and be able to navigate they're waters that they're going to come, without being able to just answer all their questions all the time. We need to help them get to the answers themselves.
That's so good. I was actually, reminds me, I'm going to be obnoxious, and I'm going to name drop right here. And if anyone hates me for that, I appreciate that. It's super obnoxious. But I was in a phone conversation a couple of months ago. After I went to the Orange Conference, I had asked Tom Shefchunas if he and I could chit chat on the phone for a few minutes, because I wanted to ask him some questions and pick his brain about some stuff. And so he and I were chit chatting on the phone. In May, he had done a breakout at Orange. Some of the people listening might have been at that breakout that he did at the Orange Conference, called Rebuilding, Rethinking Youth Ministry from the ground up.
Yep.
And so it was this
I was there. Yep.
You were there. Okay.
Yep.
So you remember this, right? It was like this like monumentally incredible breakout that he did, right? So,
yep.
but in the breakout, it was very, very like, it wasn't like the nuts and bolts of like, okay, what time should my youth group be at? Like this it was very abstract. It was very like foundational, and it was almost like the why behind student ministry, not just the what to do. And afterward, and he and I were chit-chatting on the phone, he said, man, Mike, honestly, I thought that workshop or that breakout kind of flopped. And I said, you thought it flopped? Like, Chef, that was like the best thing I've ever heard. And he was telling me, he was like, Mike, I had a bunch of people that came up to me afterward, and they just asked me, like, they were just asking me questions about, like, what do I do about this situation in my youth group? Or what do I do about that situation in my youth group? And they were just asking me these questions about, like, they just wanted me to fix it for them. They just wanted me to give them the answers. And he was like, Mike, I'm not trying to give people answers. I'm trying to change the world.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, that's good stuff. And but then it reminded me, like, honestly, I kind of see the G Shades thing as the same thing. Like, I'm not interested in giving kids the answers to every one of life's difficult questions. I'm interested in giving them a filter that will help them navigate it. And I think kind of what Chef was doing in that breakout is he was giving us like a filter. He was giving us like a paradigm from which to launch out and create our own magic, to create our own stuff in our own youth groups. And I kind of feel like the G Shades thing is similar. Like, I'm not interested in just giving students all of the spoon feeding them the answers to life's tough questions. Like, I think we should be giving them a gospel just over and over again, leading students to the cross, leading them to the cross, leading them to the cross, and just over and over again hammering that, like, whatever question you have about life, about love, about hate, about relationships, about God, about purpose, about anything, whatever question you have, you can go to a trusted adult. That's fantastic, and you should do that. But you can first and foremost go to the gospel, and you're going to find something in there that's going to help you navigate it. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to aim to do with this curriculum, is to just make that shift so we can help students to navigate stuff a little bit better in our culture.
That's awesome. It's so good, because I think, I mean, I know I've got caught in that sort of the other paradigm where, I love when students come to me with questions and I know those answers, because that kind of inflates my ego a little bit. But what is that doing to that student for their lifelong journey with Christ? Yeah. Probably, very, very little. How much better would it be if I was equipping them to be able to answer those questions on their own, or know how to find the answers on their own, and be able to let that, like, actually transform their life, instead of just like, oh, cool, Steve gave me the answer, and they move on. Like, right. Is that really making an impact on their life? Or it's just answering it for 5 seconds, then that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, like, there's so much benefit in asking questions and of human beings, right? Like, and there's so much benefit. And I'm not knocking any of that, and I'm definitely not knocking the way that we've been teaching students. I think that obviously teaching scripture, the way that we've been teaching scripture, is very, very helpful. Again, I just wonder if this would also be helpful if we started to make a little bit of this shift and incorporate it into what we're doing as well.
Yeah, and I love the way you're doing it too. You're kind of releasing them in sets of series and stuff too. So I feel like youth ministries can try it out, kind of like what you done. You tried it out for a little bit, see how it works, and if it you make a lifelong, a permanent shift, or maybe this is kind of a supplemental sort of thing. I think it seems like there's a lot of flexibility in there, which is really cool. So.
That's good.
Yeah. So you have shared so much and so much wisdom already, but I'd like to kind of just close out our conversation today with what's a few things that kind of just stand out to you that God has taught you through the years that you would love to just share with other youth pastors out there, other youth workers. A lot of times I like to phrase this question. If you were to go back 5-10 years and tell young Mike, who's just now getting started in ministry and thinking about it and everything, what would you share from the wisdom that you've been able to gain over the last several years?
Man, that's so good. I would tell me not to rush. Man, I'm still telling me this because I'm not that. Whenever people say like wisdom, I'm always like, I don't know. I'm not sure because I'm 26. I'm still a pup. But I would tell me from 5-6 years ago, get my start, not to rush into my kingdom come. I think that's for me personally. That's my natural. I think everyone's got their stuff in which they were born a little bit disordered, and kind of the disordered thing within me, the thing that is not necessarily pleasing to God, the sin bent that I have is kind of a my kingdom come mentality. And so I remember, man, I remember like going through a phase a couple of years ago where I was interviewing at a couple of different churches, and at one of the churches I was interviewing at, they asked me the question like, what do you think you're good at or whatever, and I was like, I was telling them like, man, I want to be the greatest communicator in the world, I want to be the great, and they kind of looked at me like, and this is like, these are like really, really good communicators who were asking these questions. They kind of looked at me like, who do you think you are? Like you're 22. Like what do you, and so I think for me, like to seek ye first the kingdom of God is what I would tell me, to young me, and then I would also tell young me to pursue older adults who I trust and who will be very honest with me about what they see in me. Because again, another one of my things is I am not a naturally, I feel that I'm a little bit, I feel that one of my weaknesses is like, or one of the areas I really need to grow in and want to continue to grow in is like extreme self-awareness and knowing exactly how I'm being perceived by people. And I think in order to help me grow in that area quicker so that I offend fewer people and so that I miscommunicate to fewer people over the course of my ministry journey, I would tell me to find some adults who I trust who can say, you know what, when you said that, you meant it as a joke, but nobody else took it that way. Everyone thought you were serious and now they think you hate them. And so I think for me, those two areas of self-awareness and just staying humble, allowing young Mike to be young Mike. Like it's okay to be young and to not know anything about anything because I'm young. And I really, really struggled with that when I was younger. And I think I still do. I'm sure there are some people who are listening to this podcast who are much more seasoned in ministry, and they're like, you still struggle with that young buck. And I don't think they're wrong. I think they're right. So those are the things I would tell me.
That's awesome. And it's so great to hear it. Like I love just like hearing things like this. And one of the best things of, this podcast is, hearing great wisdom from other youth workers that are out there. But to also kind of catch some themes. And one of the big themes that it seems like that's really standing out to me from what you're doing at your church, how you're writing this curriculum and kind of the avenue you're going at it, and those couple tips. You're learning, God has taught you, and you're still learning, and you're trying to practice a total humility in this. Like, you know that you're not the best, you want to be better, and so you're going to put things in and place in order to get better, but not for your glory, for God's glory, and helping other people to experience that as well and to get better. It's not about inflating your ego, but it's about pointing people back to God and doing all you can to get yourself to that point as well, where you're always pointing people back to God and it's not about you. So that's been really cool just to kind of pick up that theme throughout what all you've been talking about tonight. So thanks for that example as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you asking.
Yeah, no problem. So I know people are going to want to hear more about you, hear more from you, and also check out this curriculum. Now's your chance to kind of plug away. Where's the best place for people to find you online to chat and to learn more about you, but also especially your curriculum?
Yeah, great. Let's talk about that. So best way to contact me, Twitter is great. Mike E. Haynes is my Twitter. That's it'll be in the show notes. You see it in the show notes there, Mike E. Haynes. But you can become my I've got a whole 6 or 7 followers, and so you can become one of those, and we can follow you back, and we can chit chat. That's a great way to get in contact with me. And then also in terms of the curriculum, G Shades, which I just launched, super excited about it and hope that it's really helpful. gshades.org is the website for that, and it gives a great overview of this curriculum idea and what we're chasing after here. And if you go there, there's also if you're just not sure, Steve, you mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but there's a free retreat series that we're giving out that it really is your number one best way to introduce this idea to your students and to lay some groundwork so you can begin teaching students to see life through G Shades. And so you'll see a free retreat series. It works great for a retreat if you've got a fall retreat coming up or a spring retreat or what have you, that you want to have something that can. It works fantastic for that environment. Very, very easy to retrofit it back to just a normal 4-week series. If you don't have something like that going on, it's very easy to do. And it'll be very helpful for that. And then there's just one set that we have out right now, 3 series. So 3 months of content that's out right now on the website. And then we also have really just very cool G Shade sunglasses that we're selling that we think would be a phenomenal giveaway to your students so that they can be reminded every day when they put on some sunglasses that they're to see life through G Shades. And so you'll see those on there as well, and think that'd be a cool way to kind of help students to take this home with them. But yeah, check it out. Hope you guys will check it out, and hopefully you like it and it's helpful for you and your ministry. It's definitely been helpful for me and mine.
Yeah. It's been great just to read through it, and I'm kind of thinking through is like we have the fall planned out, but okay, maybe this spring I can actually test this out because I love the concept, and even hearing more of your heart behind it today has convinced me even more. Like this is something we need to definitely look into in the future, even if it is just for a retreat or the occasional kind of supplement stuff. I think this is something that can definitely radically transform some students and how they approach life. To see it through the gospel, the lens of the gospel. So, man, Mike, it's been great to chat with you today. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, man, this was a phenomenal conversation. I'm glad we got to have it. It was cool meeting with you and chit-chatting about some stuff. Appreciate you having me on. Yeah, no problem. And, man, we're going to keep in contact, I know for sure. But until the next time we chat, may God bless your ministry. Thanks, man. Appreciate it, Steve. And thank you so much for tuning in to today's podcast. I hope you do connect with Mike Haynes and make sure you head over there to his website at gshades.org and download your own sample of his curriculum. And make sure you do connect with him online, and we will be definitely glad you did. If you are new again to the Student Ministry Podcast, make sure you subscribe. And if you liked what you heard today, make sure you leave a positive comment and share it with your friends as well that are also in ministry, and just maybe even someone that just loves a good story of what God is doing around the world. Also, we want to encourage you to follow us on Twitter at StuMinPod. That's StuMinPod. We're also on Facebook. Just search for the Student Ministry Podcast, and make sure you follow us in those places as well. And always, if you have a good story, a great story that you know of that you would love for us to get on the show, make sure you let us know. You can also always send in your questions at studentministrypodcast@gmail.com. We're actually hoping to do a kind of a special podcast in the future episode where we just kind of answer some of your questions.
and everything. So that'd be cool if you can send in some questions either by social media or email. That'd be awesome. You can also follow me on social media at Steve Cullum. That's SteveCullum. And that'd be great. I'd love to connect with you online as well. And also, one more last thank you to our sponsor for today's podcast, WorkCamp NE. That's their website is WorkCampne.com. Again, if you are looking for a mission trip opportunity for your students, make sure you check out their website, and we are so grateful for their sponsorship. And we're so grateful for you for tuning in to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Until then, may God bless your ministry.